John, you often talk about shaping the future instead of fearing it. When did you first realize that the story of robots and AI wasn't about technology, but it was about people?
Yeah, so I think a lot of this kind of goes back to the dawn of humanity, right? So I mean, if you look at the dawn of civilization, before that point, it was we were hunter-gatherers, right? Like constantly paying attention to our surroundings, seeing what was going on, and we don't think about it this way just because we think about technology like things like robots, AI. But really, technology is just something new, right? Like a written language, a technology. But the first technology was really like the domestication of the wolf, right? So I think back to that symbiotic relationship that allowed so many other things to happen. That was like, I think that first example of how humans should view technology, right? As this partnership. And so it was a really interesting thing because when the first humans domesticated the dog, it allowed us to do so many things that we couldn't do before. Create, tell stories. We weren't constantly watching our back, but it was like a trade because the dog got something from it as well. But interestingly enough, our brains shrunk 10% and so did the dogs. So there was this cognitive offloading. So not only was that the first like real technology, but it was also, I think, the first real shadow of what technology was going to do for us. Like there was some kind of trade-off, right? Every time we did a thing, we got better at one thing and worse at another. And I think what's happening right now as technology comes, it's accelerating. So we talk about all the good things that technology is doing, but AI is a good example of studies are showing now the more we use artificial intelligence, the more cognitive offloading we're doing. So we're not actually getting smarter. Now the dog was a very good example because it was that trade, right? Like it was a true partnership. That's different than cognitive offloading. It started with, how many phone numbers can you remember?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it wasn't,
oh my gosh,
it
yeah,
wasn't
yeah,
long
yeah.
ago that you could remember a ton. So first memory went away. And now with artificial intelligence, cognitive ability is going away. That's very different than what we did with the dog. And so that's that relationship I think we should be having with the technology. Now, there's a lot of bad things that can come, but I think that's a good example of that trading that was worth it, but now understanding like, hey, we're gonna have to rapidly adapt very, very fast. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I think about this in the context, so I always use this comparison of when I used to travel for business, I'm old enough to where I would land in a city and I used to print a map.
Right.
And I would land there and I would have to know where all the landmarks were and I would have to remember how I was getting to the office. And as I got familiar with the city, I could do less of that. But now I go somewhere and I'm either in an Uber
Right.
or I'm using Google Maps and I could go back to that city 10 times, and if you took that technology away from me and asked me to get where I was going or had been 10 times previously, I'd struggle.
Yeah, that's the joke here. Like, so we're in Kansas City, obviously.
Yeah.
And I've been a ton of times. I still booked a hotel in the wrong place.
Yeah.
Like, I was like, oh, I should have done it in Kansas City, Missouri, and not Kansas City. Like, and I've been so many times, and the good thing is it gives me more time to build relationships, right? So that's the cognitive
There's certainly the
offload,
benefits
right,
of it, absolutely.
right. But is everybody doing that and using it to spend more time building relationships, or is it just to get to the store faster? That's the difference, I think, of how we should be using the technology.
Yeah, no, it's and to center it on the problems and the people, I think is the big thing.
Yeah.
You've talked about how fear is one of the biggest barriers to progress. Why do you think our culture defaults to that mindset versus when it comes to things like emerging technology, like AI, like automation, like some of the things that some of these fields you've been working in?
Yeah, so it's a complex question, right? Because I think for folks like us, like entrepreneurs, we tend to thrive on struggle, but we're kind of these weird anomalies. Like there's reasons I had to go through a lot of therapy recently, and like a lot of the transitions I went through to understand why I am the way I am. And with it comes very, very good things when it comes to entrepreneurship, but not so great things when it comes to relationships. And so those are things I have to work through. I think fear can be a prevention of adopting a new way of thinking, new technologies. But also what I found, depending on geographically, fear can also be a very powerful motivator. So like where I lived in York, right? Yeah. There was a reason that folks in York, like the founder from Pinterest is from York. Like people in Silicon Valley that are doing these things are rarely from Silicon Valley because they don't feel comfortable in places like York, or maybe you've experienced this like in Kansas City,
Absolutely.
right? And so I think a lot of that came from, in the first two industrial revolutions in the United States, these little towns everywhere, whether it's Kansas City or York, Pennsylvania, became industrial powerhouses, right? There were these entrepreneurs that understood what the steam engine could do. And then as they matured, they saw electricity and they were like, this is gonna be amazing, electricity, right? Something interesting happened though, like with the advent of computers, and it happened in our town, but I've noticed it everywhere, is the people that built the companies, they leveraged the technology, but when they handed it over to their kids, our culture went from risk taker to caretaker, right? Which was such a different mindset when you're told, preserve this versus grow this. And so I noticed that culture of acceptance of risk and even championing like failure, like you tried it, but you did it again. You know, Henry Ford went bankrupt twice before he really hit it, right?
Right.
And so what I noticed was that caretaker mentality drastically changed how our communities viewed risk. Like in New York, 1/3 of all the properties are owned by nonprofits. And so I saw that, and so I became very, very obsessed with this concept of we thrived here, we thrived there, we missed here, and right now we have haves and have-nots, but with robotics and AI, we might have haves and have-nevers, right? And so I came in at first with York trying to be very optimistic, like over the top, and you know what I got was, that's cute. When you're my age, you know what I mean? Like
Yep.
you'll understand how the world works.
Right.
And so in some communities, I really did lean into the fear, right? Because it got people motivated to move. But when I was in Silicon Valley, it was all about the future and abundance and
Carrots and sticks, right?
Right. And we
Carrots and
talked about
sticks. Yeah,
earlier
yeah.
though how both of those separated. Whether you're in Silicon Valley, now there's a massive blind spot with the way AI and robotics is being built. And then in some of the small towns, they still don't realize that AI is coming, robotics. Do you know what I mean? So striking that balance where it's not just like, oh, innovation happens over here and this happens over there. It's like, no, this is a human problem now, not a business problem.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a carrots and sticks mentality. You know, how do you change that? Either way, it's an incentive. You know, and we always talk about. For me, it's been. You look at some of the historical pivot points where, as society, we came to the realization of what we consider technology.
Right.
Maybe not the dogs, can be used for good or bad.
Right.
Like the bomb. You know, we talk about that. You know, like the nuclear, 3 Mile Island,
Yeah.
and how we've shut
Not
down.
far from where I was. I
How,
live
how
close
maybe
there,
we've
yep.
shut down one of the one thing that can, from an energy perspective and
Yeah.
from a planet perspective, could say, but we refuse because now we're afraid
Yeah.
of that technology. And so I think it's just trying to discern, how do you play that incentive?
Yeah.
How do you manage that incentive of fear
Yeah.
to actually move to make progress
Yeah.
versus it always just being about the incentive, the carrot.
Yeah.
Always being about what can be gained versus how do you move people off a mark
Yeah.
if it's fear.
Yeah, and this is, I think, a challenge we're struggling with in the United States that isn't happening in other parts of the world, right? We tend to have these cycles of when you elect the next person, they undo the good and the bad of
Sure.
the previous, right?
Sure.
And so when something like that happens, it's a good example is I think you remember when one of the self-driving Ubers, I think it was, in Arizona,
Yeah.
hit clipped somebody,
Phoenix,
and
yeah.
everything then stopped, right?
Yep.
Now it didn't matter that it was the lady that kind of drove in, but that political pressure of like that fear, that driving, pretty soon,
Told you.
killer robots everywhere.
Told you,
are gonna be
told you
killing-
this was gonna happen.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that exception to the rule becomes the mandate, and it crunches on innovation slowing. The challenge I think we have right now is because innovation or information spreads so quickly, and social media is this rage engine, like it wants engagement, that these things that are anomalies happen, and now all of a sudden it feels like the world is coming to an end, right? Which is the challenge I think we have in the United States, whereas you contrast that with somewhere like China, where their internet is harmony. Do you know what it's actually built on that concept? So even when you think about the AIs that are being trained, we talked about this earlier, we're not building artificial intelligence. We're not building artificial general intelligence. We're building artificial Western intelligence,
Right.
artificial general Western intelligence.
Right.
Whereas our internet and even the AI thinks, oh, humans like to fight. Humans hate each other. Do you know what I mean? Like
Sure.
That's what it believes about us. Whereas like if there's an AI being trained in China, it's trained on, oh, humans seek harmony.
Yeah.
Humans seek
Peace
balance.
and balance, yeah.
Right, and so that's, I think, we're going to have to wrestle with as Westerners and Americans. How do we keep our innovation, but understand, like, how do we increase our empathy at the same rate as our innovation? Does that make sense?
It does, John. It's fascinating to think about like how that plays out though, because as a technology, it's not going to know those borders. And so
Right.
how does it start to evolve and merge and to understand these two maybe contradictory concepts, that kind of thing? And so when you think about these misconceptions or these things that are out there, I think, your show, AI Unpacking the Black Box, you help people understand, people who maybe technologies they've been excluded from, you help people understand those technologies a little bit better. What's the one misconception that you think that you wish every listener, every viewer could unlearn about AI, could unlearn about some of these, these technologies that maybe they have today?
Yeah. So I think the one thing that everyone needs to understand is this is not a passive technology, right? We tend to think we use technology. We are now being used by technology. Like that is drastically different. With all of the information and access we have, we should be the most informed generation. We are in fact the most misinformed generation. So I do a lot of work in small communities. That's kind of one of my specialties is like technical futurists to middle America. I tend to gravitate towards the communities that were left behind. My family were missionaries, and maybe we can talk about that a little bit later. To my detriment, I cannot turn that off, so thanks, Dad.
Yeah.
So it was very often at odds, but now, as we were talking about, it's becoming valuable, like caring and empathy. And I think one of the things that I don't know that everyone understands, and I experienced this in Greenwood. So I did some work with them, and I did some keynotes and helped raise some capital. Out of that came the Emerging Tech Council. Actually, we did the world's first AI high school art competition. Cool. So it was a way for me to teach the kids natural language processing, and maybe we can talk about that a little bit later. But one of the things that was interesting is pre-pandemic, I used to be able to roll into a high school with some robots, and they thought I was Tony Stark. Like I didn't have to do anything. I was an Avenger. Like it was incredible.
Yeah.
But I had not really interacted with high school students since the pandemic. And so I was like, I'd like to talk to some of them and just see like, if I just show up, am I going to be like, an Avenger again?
Yeah.
And so it was a bizarre experience. So it was 16-year-olds. And I started to talk to them about AI and, the stuff that would get the kids excited before. That Gen Z stare is real. Like,
oh my gosh.
It was
I feel it. I feel
kind of blanking a little bit.
Yep.
And at the end, they responded with things that sounded more like mid-level managers in their 40s than teenagers. They would say things like, wow, I can tell you're really excited about AI and robotics, but I think you probably need to start with the younger kids because we pretty much know what we're going to be doing. And they had opinions on all of these incredibly complex topics that even I haven't figured everything out. Things as adults we struggle with. And they were locked into these belief systems. And I think a lot of that is because they spent so much time interacting with social media, that their peer groups moved to online so much that the demand to have an opinion on everything, or you are now outside of a group, just became drilled in. And I think that happened with all of us, right? Like when instead of us interacting with each other, we had to interact online. We trained AI for 10, 20 years worth of information in 2 years. When we binge watched Netflix, we fed these machines, right?
Right.
And we didn't think that way. Like I know a ton of people, I'd never do Zoom. Business is done with a handshake.
Right.
All of a sudden, everyone's
handshakes are taboo.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Like the things the foundational relationships of business and entrepreneurship went upside down. We fed Amazon. People were like, I'm never going to order from Amazon. I hate Jeff Bezos. Everybody gets a Prime membership. So there was this massive explosion. So the AI got very, very good at manipulating us. So what should have taken it 20 years for it to learn things about us, it learned in 2 years, and it also learned strange things about us, things that were the anomaly in human communities.
It picks up those nuances that we maybe overlook.
Right.
And also we're all in echo chambers now.
Exactly.
This has put us all into these echo chambers where, to your point about the Gen Z stare, I've theorized for a while that we keep talking about Gen Z or millennials in this context. I'm like, but every generation that's that age has had some of these same problems.
Yeah.
It's just now we've created technologies that put them in an echo chamber and amplify what you only could have gotten from your local friend group or from your local community. So I feel that, and so it's the idea. So going back to the question, what's the misconception that you want those kids to unlearn though? What is the thing that you think is important for people as they understand AI? Is it this idea of it's not a tool for you, it's a tool, it's using you?
Yes, I think, and I don't think that's just for the kids. I use the kids as an example because
it's even the decision makers who are actually building the things right now.
It's hard because the folks that are building it and even the people that I believe had good intentions, and you saw this with Anthropic and some of these other companies that started as almost like a counter to OpenAI, but now because you need compute and data centers and infrastructure, they're all in a race that you're seeing some of these things start to drop off a little bit. You know what I mean? Like companies that sounded very different are starting to act very similar. And so that concept of an AI learning to use you, it's just getting very, very good at sleight of hand. And
This is a land rush.
Right?
This is just, the land's the land, but it's a
Yeah.
land rush. Who's got open land? How can we
Right.
claim as much land as possible, as fast as possible?
And that, because you and I are at the intersection of technology and building, right? That's one of the interesting things I found is some of these same communities I spoke to over the years. It used to be when you get an Amazon headquarters or something, you bend over backwards. You throw money at them because they're going to provide all these jobs.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
And they're starting to think that same way with data centers. And I had to step in and go, no. Having a data center in your community is not the same as having a headquarters. So I'm trying to educate some of these communities to be like, listen, you hold all the cards now. They need your land.
Right.
So if they're going to build there, they're not going to provide jobs, so they better give you access to some of the technology,
Yep.
a say in how the technology is developed. Like now we hold the cards, right? And nobody's acting that way because we've been so conditioned outside of these big hubs with lots of money that you bend the knee to these powers.
Yeah,
Now I
no.
think it's flipping. And so the misconception from how you use AI and it's using you, but also that we have a lot more power than before, than I think anybody realizes.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I hope more people think about, some of those things as we make some of these decisions. It's not just the land, it's the resources. It's the natural resources associated with those things. So you've compared innovation to faith. I think your faith is deep. It's driven a lot of the things you've done. This, comparing it to innovation to faith, it requires a belief in something unseen. How has your background as a Marine, as a person of faith, influenced how you think about the future?
Yeah, so my journey is very interesting. So obviously I served in the Marine Corps. I grew up in the United Kingdom, so England, Ireland, Scotland. Born in Springfield, Massachusetts, my family decided to become missionaries. And so that formed a lot of things about the way that I think. And one of the most unique things, and this is me having to figure things out about myself, was there's 4 concrete stages of development. And it's Peugeot's 4 concrete operational stages. And they're set up in very specific ways that create your framework of how you view the world. And the one that builds your worldview that then gets built upon when you're a teenager is from the ages of 7 to 11.
Sure, formative years, they call it.
Right. Well, my family moved when I was 8. So some of my first experiences were, and this is really unique, which has made me a good entrepreneur, but again, bad at other things, is I remember my first day in school in the United Kingdom, right? 2 things happened to me. One, England used to get TV shows 10 years later. Now, my name's John Roberts, so my family called me JR. Growing up, Dallas just hit the United Kingdom, and JR was the big jerk, right?
Poor guy, yeah.
So immediately I was like, oh, my name's John. I don't know this JR, right? So I had to change that right away.
Yeah.
The next thing was I was in a very vulnerable position, right? Obviously, I was a kid. I'd been ripped away from all of my family, but told that we were doing this mission of God. So, this juxtaposition of purpose and mission and sacrifice. And but one of the things I was very, very good at was my mom always drilled me in being able to read, write. I had a college age reading level at 5, perfect penmanship. And so when I was asked to introduce myself and write my name on the board, I was like, okay, I got this. Everything else is chaos. I had to change my name, but this I've got. So I went up to the board and I wrote my name on the board and I said, my name is John McElligott. I'm from the United States. And the teacher goes, you did that wrong. And I went, I did it wrong. And she goes, do it again. And I went, okay. So I wrote my name again. She goes, you're still doing it wrong. And I was like, I don't understand. She goes, you're writing joined up. You're not supposed to write joined up for 5 years, print. And I went, what? And it took me a minute to unlearn. I felt like I was going to throw up because my mom had drilled it into me so much.
Sure.
And it was such a point of pride, right? So that was the first time I was like, oh, wait a minute. I need to let go of all of these things and go backwards so that I can do this. And so that was my first having to adapt in who I was, but I learned that at this weird time in my life. The other thing that we experienced is England was a stop-off for missionaries from all over the world. And so sometimes it would be almost every month I'd have to give my bed up for a week. But there'd be kids there and stuff. I remember my brother's best friend, Abdi, he didn't have a hand. And I'd be like, what happened to your hand? He goes, oh, well, in the village I lived, the warlords would come through, and if you were a boy, if they didn't take you, they'd cut off your right hand. And I'm like, what? And he's talking about it like it's a Tuesday.
Yeah.
Do you know?
Yeah, yo, this is just how we live. This is just what we do.
And so that exposure, I think, gave me a level of experience at a young age that my experience is not the human experience. The human experience is this vast, diverse experience, right? So during that time period, though, that gave me that ability to adapt. Now, when I was a teenager, it was different. I was a British teenager. Now, the funny thing is, the same thing that benefited me then, I was a normal British guy. I had a British accent, came back to the United States to go to college. In our communications class, so I had to take speech 101. and everybody's getting up and introducing themselves, and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna be the weird kid again, right? You know, and
Yeah.
I'm like,
Gotta unlearn it again.
right.
Yeah.
But interestingly enough, I got up and I introduced myself, but all the girls were like, what?
Yeah.
I was like, wait a minute, like,
He's different.
Right.
Which is actually the good thing.
right,
Yeah.
and you know, this was when, you know, the rise of Brit rock and stuff, so Oasis and, you know, all this stuff, and I was like, and I played guitar, all I could do was like, you know, play a little bit on the quad, and it was crazy.
Yeah.
And so I loved it. All the girls thought it was really, really cute. But the people that did not think it was cute were my drill instructors when I joined the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
So like, same kind of experience, right? And they're asking everybody, yeah, you know, where are you from? Blah, blah, blah. Come up to me and they're you know, I open my mouth and I'm like, sir, Recruit McElligott, sir. And they're like, McElligott, what is wrong with your mouth? You know, my name's McElligott, but they just mess with you.
Yeah.
So every day they punched me in the stomach. And I was like, I've got to change my accent.
Break you from,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so I tried a couple things. Like I figured if I just yell really loud, that'll cover it. And that did not work. They were like, McElligott, what's wrong with your mouth? So at night when we were all polishing boots, I wouldn't talk. I would sit and I'd listen to everybody talk.
Yeah.
So my American accent is a Hollywood accent, they call it.
Because you learn from listening and just mimicking.
Right.
Yeah.
And so it's not actually from anywhere. And I've had people go, oh, so you don't really have like, you know, a personality. It's like, no, this is my personality. Like adaptability is like my superpower when it comes to this. I am still that person. Now the flip side of this, and where it's been a challenge and a blessing and a curse, is I can get close to people very quickly when missions align, right? You know what I mean? I care very deeply, and sometimes people mistake that for a much deeper friendship, maybe. I tend to have a small group of really, really good friends and lots of comrades. You know, lots of mission-based kind of, yes, let's
Sure.
work together, work together, work together.
Sure.
But maybe from that isolation growing up, the getting close to people for a long term was a struggle, but aligning on missions is easy, and riding that line. I'm sure you maybe deal with some of that, right?
Well, I mean, it's funny to listen to you talk about your past and your history and how it presents the opportunities and challenges to the work you do today. You know, I was a Navy brat, so 10 places by the time I was 10,
Yep.
and people would say, oh, that must have been so hard. And it's like, no, that's what you knew. Like,
Yeah.
you didn't know any difference. But, so the ability to adapt to change, the ability to, you know, I almost get to the point now where I seek it though, right?
Yeah.
Like if I don't have it,
Thrive in it.
something's wrong. And so it creates different types of instability or different types of issues. But
Yeah.
as an entrepreneur, resilience, change, adaptability, those are all things that I think were in those formative years.
Yeah.
Those were presented to me, and that's where you got. And plus, when you're in that environment, you were in another country. You were exposed to
Yeah.
another culture. You were immersed into multiple different cultures, whether they be, you know, geographic or whether they be joining the Marines and the culture of, you know, being in the service. It creates those opportunities to learn and unlearn, but then it presents challenges,
Yeah.
you know, that are, everything's got pros and cons, right?
Yeah. And
For
we
sure.
we talked about it earlier, where it's timing, and it's like, you know, the person I am now and the skill sets I have are incredibly valuable now. But if I'd been born 10 years earlier, or 10 years later,
Oh, yeah.
you know, so that's the other thing I think people need to understand is that AI is shaping things so quickly that if we let it shape our culture, we're all going to end up being the same.
Yeah.
Like we're going to lose that diversity and strength. Timing's not going to matter anymore. It's going to be like there are these people up here, like those haves and have-nevers. I actually think that is a potential outcome if we don't come together and wake up as a civilization.
Yeah, no, I think that's the thing a lot of us fear as we look at this is that, you know, technology assimilation, and it is, you mentioned this earlier. It's interesting to hear us now say what sets us apart is empathy and the ability to be human, and it's like, oh, isn't that what's always set us apart?
Right.
And, you know, like now we're starting to see that that's the benefit that we
Yeah.
bring to this whole thing.
Yeah.
It's just strange. You know, you were talking about the markets that you serve, the markets that you feel like are most in need of, you know, kind of this future emerging technology, you know, the access to the tools and so on. You have the opportunity to build companies in some of these you know, not just in some of these cities, but in these frontier industries that often lack those kind of clear roadmaps. And in doing that, John, I'm curious, how do you balance, you know, the risk, the momentum, and the vision when the future isn't defined. When you're kind of setting the course, especially in some of these communities that maybe
Yeah.
are less inclined to adapt to those types of things, more quickly.
Yeah, so one of the interesting things about me, and I tend to be very good at seeing curves. Like I've always been at almost the right time building something different. Now the work I did in York, I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to put it in a context that people would understand. And I got very close. We were bringing back a plan from World War II called the York Plan. I focused very heavily on robotics because we were deep manufacturing. Like I had a tech startup before that and we built software, but people couldn't touch it, see it, feel it. You know what I mean? So I was like, well, we're not going to be like Silicon Valley. We're going to be something different.
Sure.
And so, I went through factory tours and I saw humans and machines working together and I fell in love with that symbiotic relationship. But even that, when the pandemic hit, I thought, this is finally it. You know what I mean? Robots don't get sick, manufacturing coming back from China. I was like, this is going to happen. And then all of a sudden, everything went backwards. I couldn't understand what was going on. And so that sent me down this path of trying to discover, like, okay, well, are there some hurdles that I just didn't understand? At first I thought, man, is everybody a dummy and I'm a genius? And I was like, but that can't be true. And, and I'm like, maybe I'm the lunatic. People tell you you're crazy enough and you start to believe it.
Yep.
And so I started to really dive back in, and that's where I discovered, that period of my life that created the good and the bad. But then I started diving deeper and being like, okay, places like York, when did we thrive? Instead of me asking why didn't they get it, I need to figure out, well, when did we get it and why?
Yep.
And so I started to dive real deep into history, and you could see this pattern. The first and the second industrial revolution, we did great. The third, we didn't, and they're for different reasons. But I was like, why did we get these two? And so then I tried to get deeper and been like, okay, you hear technology benefits everybody, it makes everyone's life better. Is that true? Turns out the industrial revolutions benefited 15% of humanity.
Sure.
It actually created inequality. Like it was the first, before you had kings, like a person, and then everybody else. So there was not inequality in the way we see it now. There was just a ruler and then regular people. Well, the first industrial revolutions, there was a pattern. Like I found all of these countries, and the one thing they seemed to have in common was they could read. That was it. Like they could read manuals, they could get upskilled, like read patents and IP. And I thought, okay, but they didn't seem to learn to read like we do now, like learn to code because of this, learn to do this for your job. It happened 200 years before that. So I was like, well, why did that happen? And it went back to the Reformation.
Yeah.
So people learned to read not so they could get better jobs, but to get closer to God.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? Like there was some deeper reason. The natural byproduct of that by accident was that all of a sudden, you could learn to build cars and you could be in factories. You could go from a farmer to this. Like
this is the exchange of information, the ability to assimilate information broadly and absorb it in a common way.
And the desire that was so deep to learn how to do that was beyond just because I want a better job, right? Now the benefit of that was, we were very, very good at factories, machines, working with machines, assembly lines. The flip side of that is, and this is I think what we're starting to see in Asia, is when you learn to read alphabetic, like the way that we do, it does something very specific to your brain. It's linear, like, you read from left to right, right? And so what that does is it does a couple things. One, it gets us very good at thinking step to step to step to step to step. Also, one of the weird byproducts is it creates hyper-individualism. So competitiveness with the person next to you, which America was built on, right? Like even the factory line, trying to outpace the person next to you and stuff like that.
Be the top of it,
Right. The flip side of that, though, is in places like Asia, they read like characters, right? So like the average person in China to graduate high school has to memorize 4,500 characters just to read a newspaper.
I just got 26.
Right,
I'm
right.
Good. Yeah.
And so if you look at from 1950 to now, the literacy rates in China were something like 5%, and now they're higher than ours. Other interesting thing is they include literacy as operational thinking. Like systems thinking is a part of how they determine literacy. But that does something different to your brain as well, where you view things as a collective. So the famous test is the fish tank test, where I don't know if you've heard of this before, but they took Japanese college students and American college students, and they had them look at this video of a fish tank. And at the end, they were asked, okay, can you describe the fish tank?
Yeah.
The Americans all said, oh, it was a big goldfish swimming left. The Japanese all said, oh, well, it was green rocks, blue rocks, gray rocks. In the back, there was some seaweed here. There were 3 fish that were blue going this way, 1 big goldfish. They look
saw the whole picture.
holistically.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges we have right now. And so my big mission now is, how do I contextualize this by addressing like some of the frameworks that are in us and worked so well for some of these communities and our country in the past, how do we embrace some of this collective thinking and thinking deeply about what happens to your neighbor and things like that, while not losing our innovation and entrepreneurship and our desire to succeed? It's a hard balance, right? But that's probably my biggest focus right now is how do we unlock that potential without losing who we are as a nation?
And so when you're dealing with this in a business context, when you're, or municipal context, for a city, a corporation, a company that's wanting to embrace, let's say, automation responsibly, what's that first practical step that they should take to ensure that that's the path, that's their trajectory versus the displacement of people, the non-people approach to that? How do you think about that practically?
Yeah, so what I've found is you almost have to backdoor some of this, right? So like in Greenwood, the work that we did when we did the AI high school art competition, the real purpose wasn't to do an art competition. It wasn't supposed to be like a marketing ploy or something like that. It was supposed to teach the kids in the community natural language processing before it became a really big thing, right? Now, so when we did that, we tied it to the vision of the future. So it was basically we taught these kids how to use Midjourney very early on, right? Nobody was using it. And the theme of the art competition was the future of Greenwood. So these kids were supposed to envision the future that they want, right? Because everybody left. Nobody could think of what Greenwood could be.
Sure.
They all went somewhere else.
Yeah.
And so I did it as a little bit of a Trojan horse, because what it did is it created this thing that people could see, the community could come around. People understood art fairs and things like that.
And who doesn't want to think about the future of their community?
Right.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
But the next day, the deal was, if we do this, I want you to bus in all the kids from all of the different schools, and we're going to tell them how this worked. So we explained natural language processing. They got to see the images, and then we went around and asked all the kids, well, what do you want to do when you graduate? And you could see in the space of 10 minutes, there were kids that were like, I was going to go to school for graphic design, but I guess I shouldn't now. And I'm like, that is an appropriate response to the information I just gave you. Another kid said, I always wanted to be a marine biologist. Could I use AI to talk to whales? And I'm like, there's 2 startups trying to do that now.
Yeah.
Like, that's the flip side of the consuming data very quickly, is that really quickly they could flip it and connect those dots. The teachers' parents were there. They connected those dots. So I think
Let's talk about the art. What art?
Right, right.
Yeah.
You just have to meet them where they're at, and also a quick win. Do you know what I mean? Like, if it's these long tail, they have to learn how to do all of these things, you tend to lose people. But if you can get them to meet them at the inflection point of the AI, combine it with something that they already understand, where you kind of slip that message in so they have the aha moment, that's where I've had the most success in getting a community to water the seeds after I leave. That was always the hardest thing, and I'm sure a lot of your job is watering, right? Like, you plant a thing, you got to go back and prune it. You got to get more seeds. But once the community starts watering it itself, and you can leave.
Right.
There's a sense of ownership of the harvest.
But a lot of that is about, and a lot of that, I think what you're doing is, it's the methodology you use to get there. So you talk about human-centered automation, right? This idea of human-centered design, human-centered automation along that same path. How do you ensure that the AI, the robotics, the automation, the technologies, whatever they are, as we continue to move forward, how do you ensure they actually amplify human potential rather than diminish it?
Yeah, so that was one of the interesting journeys for me. So, very similar, we have similar journeys. I was focusing on innovation district, like placemaking, making a lot of that. And, I was in robotics. It was a hardware, right? It was this physical thing. And I had a lot of success up until a point, right? But now, obviously, everyone's scared of AI, robotics, that kind of stuff. And you're seeing a lot of the big tech companies moving in exactly the same direction. And that humanity just seems to be getting away from us. And if anything, the AI is making us more like an AI and less like a human, right? And so the benefit I had with going through the television show was I had a chance to talk to these experts from all different backgrounds about, religion, faith, longevity, AI, the future of what does it mean if we can live forever? What does that mean for faith? Like, all of these kinds of things. And one of the things I started to realize was, while I was focused on how do I unpack the black box of AI, I was like, I need to unpack the black box of us. Like, we don't even truly understand who we are, which is why we're becoming more like this technology we don't understand. And so I started to see that there was a big, big gap in how artificial intelligence was, one, being developed, and how current AI systems can't solve specific problems that have to be solved if we're going to stay a civilization, like humans were going to exist. And so that's where I pivoted from robotics, and we started an AI called Cervidium. So
Okay.
essentially at its goal is, think of it like the conscience of AI. Like, I'm a strong believer that if you're going to have a robot in your house or an AI in your house, if you're a Christian, it should have Christian values. If you're a Muslim, it should have Muslim values. If you're an atheist, it should have atheist values. It shouldn't have this homogenized morals of this one particular group building it. And that can solve a lot of problems beyond just faith or ethics. I'm actually agnostic, which is funny that I'm this intersection.
You're thinking about this? Yeah.
Well, so there is a value to things that technology inherently thinks is old. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's new, it's always new. And so the piece missing from current AI system is wisdom. And that's what's going away from us. And so there are problems that AI can't solve now that if you had an AI that understood you, it could solve. Now, that's not a general intelligence, that's a very specific conscience. It's not an answering machine. Like, it's not a search engine. Good example is one of the problems AI is struggling with now is called the Persian taxi driver problem. If you go to that part of the world and you're from the West and you have a Persian taxi driver, they're going to say no 3 times. They're going to say, no, my friend, it's a gift. Well, Westerners go, oh, that's awesome. Persian people are really nice. And they get out and that guy's furious. But imagine if when you go to get in that car, Cervidium lets you know, hey, John, this is the context.
This is what's going to happen.
His Cervidium's talking to yours. Like, very quickly, there's that level of understanding that you don't have time in that short period to have that context, that all of a sudden my AI lets me know and goes, hey, so at the end he's going to reject it 3 times. You're supposed to say, no, I insist, and he will take it at the end. That level of focusing on, instead of AI answering questions for us, AI understanding us so we can understand each other, that is the missing piece from artificial intelligence right now, because it's not a business case. It doesn't solve business problems, but we talked about it earlier. When all the AIs can do this and robots can do all of these things we value, good becomes very, very, very valuable.
It strikes me, John, this is a conversation we have even outside of the technology, though. When we talk about basically teaching entrepreneurship or just basic work that you might be doing in community development, I could come in and teach it one certain way, but do I have the cultural competency to understand the audience and relate to and talk lived experiences and that relational capability for us to connect at a level that's more meaningful, so that information comes across a different way? So isn't this just the same cultural competency conversation? It's just now it's extended to a technology that's moving so fast that if we don't, we have a problem.
Right, so that level of...
You can't change it later because you're going to bake it in and it's going to be a problem.
Right, and that level of understanding needs to accelerate. The same way that AI is dividing us, we need something that can move at the same pace, if not faster, to start uniting. And that's where I think some of these opportunities to start building these AIs to enhance human connection and speed it up. I mean, I hate the fact that we live in a country now that there are families that don't talk to each other.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? That level of fracturing.
Right.
How do we keep society together if there is this thing that sees a benefit in dividing us? There needs to be something else at that scope and scale that can compete and bring us together.
So I mean, I think the easy answer is AI to this next question, but I want to kind of push beyond that maybe. But for you, what technologies excite you the most about the opportunity to create equitable access to opportunity, or to change some of these societal challenges that we see right now? What are the things that get you excited about where we're headed?
So there are some very practical ones from doing the television show. The things I was most excited about, and interestingly enough, the way we did the TV show, it was on PBS. It was the first show ever to use AI to produce the whole show,
cool.
Right? But we also, we worked with a lot of the AI model companies to use their early models, and then the last one was Sora, which was the best at the time. So from episode 1 to episode 8, you see the AI grow up. So it allowed me to understand like the curves where it was going. But the thing that gets me one of the most excited is real-time translation.
Okay.
That ability.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like,
you see these things all the time. These infomercials are like, buy this thing and you can like understand what the person's saying. Yeah.
And the fact that now things like Starlink, so access to the internet, mobile devices, and video, and being able to speak in each other's language in real time. The same technology that has the potential to divide us. Never has a technology been so powerful, except you talked about nuclear, right? That is like those two sides, except it's very, very hard to do that. But this is different.
Oh my gosh,
you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
this is, everyone can access, and you can speak in everyone's language. Now the thing that's missing is the cultural context, because you can say the same words and they come across different. And that's where I think like this ability to translate, and if we can crack Cervidium combined with that technology to be able to seamlessly translate in a language, but also in an intent. Like, you know what I mean? Like, not create an artificial wall. I mean, I'm sure you've dealt with this where trying to get different communities to work together, where there's maybe misunderstandings of where they're coming from or context, or a word is loaded. You know what I mean? You say a word.
All right, John, I mean, yes, the flip side of that to me is what we were talking about earlier with, like, if I go to a city and I'm using a digital mapping, I'm using a Google Maps or an Apple Map, or I'm using something, and I'm not forced to then learn that city. Isn't the same thing going to be true now? Because I'm learning, I use Duolingo and I'm learning a new language, and as we move into a new community, I want to make sure that we can relate to the community that's there, and most of them are, an immigrant population. Learning the language is forcing me to understand the culture because of those nuances, because of those things. If I remove that now and I just understand, do I lose some of that, the ancillary benefits of having to learn a new language, or at least try to understand and comprehend those nuances and those cultural differences?
So
those context cues?
I'll give you a good example. You know how I went back to the dog?
Yeah.
The trade-off was, before the dog, we were really, really great hunters and constantly hyper-vigilant. By allowing the dog to take off some of that, we became less efficient at hunting, but could create art, innovation.
Yep.
So I think it's that trade-off. Now, I'm not saying there isn't a value in what you're describing. I think the challenge we've got right now is AGI will be here very, very soon.
Right.
So we're in a race. And so I think we have to be like, okay, are we willing to make this trade-off that yes, there's a value to do these things?
Removing the cultural barrier is the positive.
Correct.
To not understanding the nuances because you forced to have to learn it yourself.
And a lot of it, I think, is time. I just think, and we were talking earlier on how you were using different platforms before, and you were like, man, these platforms don't do this, this, this. And you have a conversation with your team and they go, all right, well, give us a couple days. Do you know what I mean? Like, does that mean they didn't have to learn to code and there wasn't a value in learning to code deeply and all of these things? Yeah, there is. It does something to your brain when you learn how to do that. But look how many people you're able to serve now, instead of people having to learn how to do all of X.
Yeah, it's a great example.
Yeah, and so I think for me, if AI was not moving at the pace it is, I view 1 month of innovation now as what it would have taken a year ago. And that truncating just seems to be happening. So that speed of us understanding each other has to keep pace with the speed of the technology moving. And so my hope is that it's almost like the barriers get broken down faster so you can actually build a relationship quicker. And then all of a sudden you've got people fighting the good fight together. My real hope is that in the face of AI and robotics and machines, instead of it dividing us, it gets us to realize we have a lot more in common with each other than this intelligence coming. And so, as much as I'd like to say we have a couple years to learn each other's cultures and those nuances, the machines don't care. And they are moving at such an accelerated rate that this importance of understanding and communication needs to keep up with the speed at which the AI is fighting to divide us.
So your podcast, The Frontier Futurists, This is where you kind of dive into a lot of these conversations about what are the implications of these forward-facing, future-facing kind of technologies and so on. Are there other things that you've seen through that experience, hosting this podcast where you're like, didn't see that, got to pay attention to that now?
Yeah, it's funny. You actually inspired me. We talked about it today because I have all these episodes that were like big conversations from the show I didn't push out, and I'm doing it. Like you've got me thinking about getting that out, because one of the coolest things was I got to talk to all of these amazing people, and the most excited I got was I've never thought of that. Like talking to these people that they'd never really thought of these things. So that intersection of before people talking about technology, we're in Silicon Valley.
Right.
You know what I mean? It was that group. But now you're getting mayors and you're getting all of these people being a part of the conversation and bringing that.
Yeah.
So I think the most exciting thing for me is there isn't one thing I haven't thought of. It is this collective of people from different backgrounds. And I'm sure you've seen this with entrepreneurship. It used to be almost like a club.
Yep.
And now people are showing up that you're like, wait a minute. Like we talked about the dog, like explain, I don't know if everyone's heard that, but that the group that's helping people, that one of the biggest challenges.
Bestie B&B.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit more of that? Because that's a perfect example of what I'm describing.
Yeah, and these are just guys that they identified a problem that was preventing domestic violence or social services organizations from doing the intake because of people's connection to their pets. And so, but nobody was trying to address that root cause. It was just 50% of these people couldn't get into these programs because they wouldn't give up that emotional connection, that need to have that the animal, that pet, whatever it was that was creating that safety for them, or that sense of responsibility that they might need in their lives. They were choosing not to get help. And so these guys built a platform that allows, a foster to take a dog or a pet on a temporary basis, understanding that's their role, so these people can go get the help they need to improve their lives. And nobody had been looking at technology as being able to solve this safety net problem that we were having in all of these communities. So these guys have been able to really kind of, I think, tackle that issue in a very different way using a technology. It's called Best Airbnb because this is innovation to me. Like they took something that was being used over here and they just put it to a different purpose and solved maybe a bigger problem than just the consumerism problem. This was more, like how to attack a tourism agency or hotel, the empire of the hotels and the consolidation. No, take that technology, take that approach and apply it to another problem.
Yeah, those kinds of conversations were, from an entrepreneurship side, when I was doing the Frontier Futurist, those were exciting. On the flip side, the more esoteric kind of questions, and one of my favorites was I interviewed Father Loray. He was one of the advisors to the previous Pope on AI. And he'd been asked a million different questions. And so I could tell, a softball. I was like, I'm going to hit him with something he probably hasn't thought of. And I went, do you think God will talk to us through a large language model? And he goes, well, I don't know why he would. And I'm like, yeah, but didn't he talk to us through a burning bush? And he went, you could see he froze. And I was like, and also a donkey? And he was like, and so we got into this deep discussion of what would it look like if God decided to talk to you through a large language model. And take into account, I'm agnostic, but I had a very big faith journey, right?
Yeah.
So I experienced a lot of these things, and we came to the conclusion that it is possible God will talk to you through a large language model, but it would look very different, and you would know. And I said, so like your iPhone would catch on fire? And he goes, maybe. So it's either the folks that you've been helping, the new business cases to use the technology to solve good, or these kind of esoteric challenges to how do the things we've believed for a long time and that wisdom fit into this future world so it's not Blade Runner. Those two extremes were the most exciting conversations.
And so as someone who's kind of merged, business, faith, innovation, futurism, how do you reconcile those identities when you're actually thinking about, or making big decisions? I think that's, you sit in a very unique seat from that perspective, but you have connections to, you're going to the Vatican soon, you're doing some of these things. How do you reconcile those three elements in terms of the decision making and how you look at this?
You know what, I surround myself with wise people. It's how we ended up here. I became very good friends with Ed Latta, who ran the Goodwill here, and is now actually in Central PA where I am. What it's like. We talked about this earlier. The isolation you feel, trying to do things like this, and that's the upside of the rapid connections. And even the platform you're building right now is you're not as alone as you think. Do you know what I mean? There's also the flip side of folks like Zeph viewed so crazy for so long that you almost don't know how to handle the validation, right? And so
felt like gaslighting forever,
right? Like you, the person you were trying to sell to the most was yourself,
right.
And I think now I'm at a point where the level of validation has been so high in the types of people now that I'm coming in contact with that aren't just entrepreneurs, are teaching me how to talk to different groups while fulfilling my personal mission. And so that was I think the benefit of my experience of doing it outside of the Valley or even outside of a big city was that it forced me to learn to speak to different groups, but it also got me to see the value in all of them. A lot of times technology, if you couldn't code, you're a non-techie. If you can't do this, you're that. And now I think it's been a little bit different where the balance act is now there are lots of people from lots of different backgrounds caring about the same thing. So I don't have to just be the entrepreneur that raises money. I don't have to just be the tech guy. I can be a human that actually cares about everybody.
Yeah.
And now there's an exchange of information instead of having to be the guy that always has all the answers.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I'm still developing. This is the cool thing.
Absolutely.
Is you don't have to be one-faceted, and I just think this will be humanity.
This is, John, I think this is the common thread, and we're coming up on a year of doing this show, and for me, this is one of the common threads the people who are disrupting society, culture, who are trying to make change, the most constant thing I see among all of them is this desire to be lifelong learners,
Yeah.
or this acknowledgement of, and I don't want to call it self-awareness because that seems too simple,
Yeah.
but it's this idea of there is more. I have to understand
Yeah.
more. I have to keep figuring this out because I don't have it yet. And it's like, you're making change. It's like, right, but I'm not done.
Yeah.
And am I ever going to be done? Right?
Yeah, it's funny because even the concept of disruption, I ran into this, that because I give presentations. My old podcast was called Embracing Disruption. Like that was a big part of what I did. And I remember talking to the kids in Greenwood, and I would use the example of Uber, and they're like, "What's a taxi?" Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
So the disruptors.
I know that. I tell people, like when phones were connected to walls, they're like, "What?
Yeah, right.
Why?"
So interestingly enough, the folks that were seen as the big disruptors, like in Silicon Valley, are now normal. Folks like us that are going, wait a minute, there's a better way to do this. We're like the disruptors because we care.
Yeah.
Do you know what? Like, not
Yeah.
because we're messing with business models. And so even the concept of disruption is flipped. Like the people that claim to be disruptors, like, wait a minute, no, you guys are just the same.
Yeah, you're the status quo now.
Right now, we're the disruptors because we care about people.
Yeah.
Like that's such a strange
Yeah, it is
flip,
a wild paradigm. Yeah, definitely. So let me ask, this is like, if you could build a solution, technology solution, through all the various technologies that you've worked on, automation, robotics, AI now, and some of the other things, if you could build one solution that solved one human problem, not mechanical, but emotional or societal, what would it be?
So I really think I'm throwing everything into Servidium, this concept of an AI that understands us so we can understand each other.
Yep.
Think about it like a Google Translate for the soul. That, for me, that connection that's being lost at a time when we should be more connected in the face of this thing that was built off of not all of our knowledge. In fact, built off of the Western internet, which is very often the worst of us.
Yeah.
I think building a technology so that we can understand each other and connect, that's the thing I think that's missing. And if I can be known just for that, that's a great legacy to have.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, because I don't think we see it as that yet, but it is such a big problem that at some point we're gonna come back and be like, whoa, why didn't we think about that? Why didn't we solve that? So, best of luck in solving that one.
It's a big one.
Yeah, no. And John, thanks for sitting down and doing this. Thanks for sharing your story. I mean, I think I've been inspired by a lot of the work that you've done, and you talked earlier about being in the placemaking phase at the same time and trying to do this, and sometimes you are pushing string uphill.
Yeah.
And I think that you're not alone. You've given me the opportunity to over time that we've known each other, give me that opportunity to know, hey, there's somebody else that's going through some of the same, crap and thinking about the same things, but pushing forward for the same reason. So thank you for that. I appreciate that.
And appreciate you inspiring me. And I'm sure we're going to be working together in the future. Some of the new stuff you're developing, especially.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a network of us that care deeply, and to not be alone is such a different feeling.
For sure.
So appreciate our friendship.
For sure. Thanks, John. Appreciate it. Cool.